Okay, I think we're live, Olivia.
I think we are.
Hi, my name's Simon Holbrook. I'm Principal Consultant for Assurity's Design Thinking team based in Auckland.
And my name is Olivia Wilson, and I work as an innovation coach in our design thinking team here in Auckland.
So we're pretty excited to be reaching out to you today and have some fantastic questions that have been brought to us. I think the best thing is if we read these out, and we'll try and answer these as honestly as we can over the next wee while. If we don't get a chance to get to your question today, we've had a lot come in over the last 10 minutes particularly. We've got a twilight session late May, and we'll be reaching out to you again. So come along and meet us in person, almost as good as the video. So look, the first question I can see here, this is a curly one, Olivia, for you. Is it designing our thinking or thinking about a design?
That is a bit of a curly one. So we like to think of design thinking as a thought process. And it turns into a way of working, and more recently we talk about it as being design doing rather than design thinking.
Yeah, there's not, I mean, you're certainly thinking a lot, but this is a highly participatory way of working. It does become a thought process, I think, when you've done a lot. It becomes really intuitive, but don't be mistaken, you're not going to be with us for a week thinking. You'll be doing a heck of a lot of action-orientated work. Again, it is a process you follow. It's very rigid, which I know a lot of people aren't quite expecting when they begin, think it's going to be a really open, nebulous way of going about things. So yeah, maybe designing your thinking, but mostly design doing, I'd answer that.
Or designing to think is another way of thinking about it as well.
Sure. Look, another question, sometimes stakeholders can't express exactly what the problem is, normal, or know exactly what they want. So what stage of design thinking can help in this kind of situation?
I think there's probably two parts to this question. So the first part is stakeholders can't express exactly what the problem is. This is something we come across all the time, and we often like to run a discovery workshop with our customers up front. It's an opportunity to get all of the key stakeholders in a room together and align them around, well, what challenges do you see out there? What is your goals? What are the opportunities? And keep it as more of an open conversation, and off the back of that we can often start to articulate, well, this is what we see as your problem. But it's about getting the right people in the room at that point to have that discussion. In terms of, are we actually looking at solving the right problem here? The design thinking process, we always start off with an empathy and a defined stage in our process, and empathy is all about going out and talking to your end users or your consumers, and at this point in time we come back and we distill all of that information and define a problem and reframe it as what we call a point of view statement from the user's perspective.
Yeah, and I think just be comfortable being wrong. We are more often than not, and I think if you take that mindset, it's much easier, and just assume that we don't have the right problem to begin with, but we're going to very quickly work it out as we go. And I think to Olivia's point, we're always trying to reframe that problem from the point of view of the user, which tends to highlight some different opportunities as well. So quite normal to not know the right problem. But you need to get there pretty quickly, I think, and define what it is that you're going to do to delight, create utility, or make your customer's life better in some way.
Cool.
Should we get next question, I think?
Next question.
Yeah.
So our next question is from Chintan. No, sorry, we just did that one. So next one is from Vic. So what is the best way to implement design thinking or co-design methodologies when dealing with a target audience that is very broad in terms of ethnicities, socio-economic status, and geography? Very good question.
Yeah, that's quite a tough question as well. So a few things that pop into my mind there is one, if your audience is really diverse, consider designing with those people in the room, and at least ensure that your designers are in some way mirroring the cultures you need to work with. Otherwise it's very difficult to get in and I think be honest to the audience you're designing for. Another approach is, making sure you're engaging with extreme audiences. So understanding up front who are the greater extremes within those diverse socioeconomic groups and getting out to them as much as you can. And be candid, there is a trade-off there. You can't afford to talk to everyone. So you might need to understand who could the most important users be and ensure you're getting around there. We find, in our experience, once you're doing more than 20 interviews, it's a big project on your hands. So I think in working with the extremes, you'll probably start to unlock some fundamental truths that are true of all cultures and beliefs, and those are things that you can work with in a more direct manner.
We often find as well, when you get into the empathy work and you start talking to people, there'll be surprising extremes that come out through that process, and use that as an opportunity to go out and reach those people. You're not going to know up front who the best people are to talk to, so keep it as an open process through that empathy stage.
Yeah. Another caveat is you'll need to maybe push your insights through someone who really does understand that culture, because what's arresting and exciting for you might be very normal for that particular ethnicity. I'm very mindful of that if you're working overseas, that you're using a cultural expert or someone who's local to feed your ideas through and ensure that you are seeing things the right way. Because what you really don't want to be doing is working on assumptions and design thinking. We're trying to test those out all the time.
So it's really important to try and create a really safe environment for the people that you're interviewing, and that's often being in their own environment rather than bringing them into yours for any type of interviewing processes.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got another question here from Vic. We've done that one?
Done that one.
So, okay.
Scroll down, sorry.
So your business is in a market that is very competitive, a notable regulatory dimension with a high level of saturation, leaving margins seriously competing with your TCO, and therefore has to fundamentally change to be able to survive and continue to evolve. So the board kicks off a transformation program, gives some seed money for initiation, and then what? Some design thinking maybe. So a question or a plea. Sounds like insurance or banking industry. Personally, we've done strategic work for banks, and maybe design thinking, sure. It's a good way to start failing fast and determine what are the right strategic initiatives to work on, or on my earlier comment, maybe looking at some of your critical assumptions and testing those very, very quickly before you commit too much resource to following a path that's not going to lead you to where you need to go. I don't know if that's a statement of annoyance that design thinking is very popular at the moment, but certainly I find it a great way to work out the right thing to do by getting it wrong very quickly and failing fast. Fail early, fail often, but learn. You must learn through those experiences.
I think that sounds about right.
Good answer?
Yeah,
okay.
that sounds like might be a bigger
question.
topic, so feel free to get in touch with us, John, offline if you want to talk about that one further. So our next question here is from Greg. So how can design thinking support agile and waterfall?
Do you want to answer that one?
Sure.
Okay.
I think here at Assurity that is something that we are looking very closely into, how design thinking and agile start to align a lot more. So I think we start to see design thinking as a bit of an upfront process ahead of any agile or waterfall delivery. Agile and design thinking have very similar approaches in terms of short sprints, testing back with customers often, and iterating as you go. Design thinking is all about trying to understand and make sure that we are solving the right problems and then putting those right problems and ideas through an agile delivery process. So we think that design thinking and agile align really closely in terms of design thinking's making sure that our agile processes are looking at solving the right problems as we go through.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest disconnects we've seen have been the transition from design thinking into agile delivery, and we certainly focus a lot of our attention into making that as elegant as possible. One of the things we've seen is when you've maybe done empathy research, you've gone out to your customers, you understand their latent needs and how to make life better for them, and somehow you've encapsulated this, and then you need to hand it off to a development team who's staring at a computer and don't really understand what you're doing. And what we find there is if you can bring the user stories and epics into the design thinking, allow the designers and the people who've done the research to author those and ensure that that empathy gets transferred into the development cycle. Otherwise, what we find is often companies will default to MVP, the minimum viable product to build, because we can get it moving in Scrum and get deliverable results very, very quickly, versus making the minimum desirable product, or we call it MDP. I promise normally never to use acronyms, but it's important here because what's desirable and what's viable are very, very different things, or the minimum feasible products. Sometimes, it's a fight that you have to be courageous of and do and chase because that's what customers really need out the other end. So we spend a lot of time ensuring that the empathy, the insights, the prototypes are in a format that can transfer elegantly straight into agile delivery, which is a great thing to do.
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that we see in that space is the cross-functional teams, and ensuring that people that are going to be responsible for the delivery are in some way, shape or form involved in that upfront design thinking part, and it just ensures a really seamless transfer between the different processes.
Yeah, another a hack, if you can't quite get there in your world at the moment, is to ensure that even the testing when you're doing your Scrum work is going back to the customers who might have been interviewed initially with the design thinking. And what I find is that allows your developers to close the loop and meet that original person themselves, and it's amazing how that can change everything for you inside the business. I think that was a great question.
Yeah.
I can hear myself getting played back there in the distance.
So our next question is from Samuel. Just going to have to scroll down there, sorry. In ways, how do I use this to be more creative in scientifically related subjects or hospitality or such in any given industry? Design thinking being made versatile.
I think there's an experimental edge for design thinking that applies in any industry. Having the confidence to put your early thoughts and ideas and concepts out there to be critiqued by a customer, I think applies in any context or setting. It does take a little bit of courage to do that and get used to being critiqued and learning it's not a personal judgment of you, but just feedback on your design, which is great. The challenge there is often finding what is that simplest thing that I can test in this moment to start getting some feedback and give me clues that I'm on the right path or doing the right thing here. And that can just take a little bit of practice. What is that one fundamental transaction that must occur for your new idea to work, whether it's in hospitality or what was the other industry there? It was quite a curious one. Scientifically related subjects. I mean, for me, the scientific process and the design thinking process are reasonably similar. You're stating an hypothesis, you're running some very quick low fidelity experiments to test it or reject your hypothesis, and if the hypothesis doesn't work, you can reframe or pivot, which is one of the normal words we hear nowadays. Maybe a point of difference there would be, design thinking can be very, very fast. 80% is often good enough to learn, whereas that scientific endeavour, maybe it's slower research and the 100% effort is what is needed. So I think, distill it down to that simplest thing that you can test, and then be creative and come up with some way you can test it. We call it fake it till you make it.
We've been fortunate enough to see success with design thinking process in a wide range of different industries, and it is really about trying to identify who is your end user or who are the key peoples we need to be talking to up front, and then the core processes or principles that underline the design thinking process do apply in all settings. So it's just working through those key principles of design thinking, and it is a very versatile way of working. Something else I'd add into that is don't start off with the biggest business problem that you have. When you're starting out in design thinking, start small, something that your senior exec aren't going to be drumming home for results on straight away, and then look for quick wins as you're starting to build up confidence with your teams in this way of working. That's
a great point. Never underestimate what anxiety will do to derail creative designing processes. If you can just distill it to something that's so small you don't really care which way the outcome falls, you'll be in a really good shape to take feedback on board and learn from that and adapt your designs and change things. So have a go, be imaginative, and I believe anything can be prototyped in any situation. Hit YouTube for inspiration, or ring us up if you're really stuck. We'll help you out.
Yeah. Our next question is from Gina. So what is design thinking? Simon.
Design thinking is a problem-solving process that can create utility for your customers in ways that you can never imagine. So really it's approaching a problem with a designer's mindset. And oftentimes I think people think designers are creative and pluck things out of the air, and yes, that may happen, but if you're going to routinely innovate and do this over time, you actually need quite a structured process to go through, and that's what design thinking is. The thinking word is dangerous. It is a thought process or an algorithm that you can go through to routinely unlock a problem and turn that into opportunity. But it's not a conceptual experience where you're sitting down in a room in silence, come up with ideas. It tends to be very participatory and hands-on and experimental, where you're building to think, learning to fail fast, and extracting lessons from that that you can commercialise from there. One thing I'd say is, move quickly with it. Speed is your safeguard for design thinking. So what you can do in 2 days is better than what you could do in 5 days. It will help you focus on that really minimum proposition that you want to understand and design for. So yeah, a thought process. Eventually you'll start to look at things in a very different way. You subtly become rewired the more times you do design thinking.
Yeah. And just adding to that process, to that thought, it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There are underlying principles within design thinking, but it's trying to identify what works in your business, in your industry, in your context, and that just takes time and learning to reiterate what works for you as a business. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So our next question here is from Simon. Is it helpful to use customers to ideate services and products, or is it best to use them to understand the real-world problems better?
G'day again, Simon. It's a yes and for me. I think absolutely you want to use the customers to understand their real problems, and this is something that all companies should be periodically doing. If you're the CEO, you should be having dinner with your customers once every 2 months and just seeing their world and what's really happening. And then totally want to have the customers in the design team, but you need to have some confidence and expertise to do that first. And we talk about creative confidence a lot. It's a real phenomenon. You don't want to put yourself into a hostile situation or something where you're going to look like a dick in front of your customer. Just call it for what it is. But I think when you're becoming more competent in working in these ways and more confident in your own abilities, absolutely have the customer in the room, and it can be quite incredible what happens in that moment. I find they tend to cut through the noise and tell you how it is very quickly. So co-design is fantastic. We always try to have an element of co-design in our projects.
As you're building up that confidence, it's probably best to start with having customers come back into the test phase, obviously, and then getting them to iterate your ideas with you, and that's when the co-design piece can become really powerful, is when you're testing it back and they're suggesting things. It's like, well, can you draw what that might look like for me? And then in that moment your customers are almost starting to design for you, which can become quite powerful as well.
It's normally an indication we've done great empathy work when the customer's picking up the pen and designing the solution for you, and it's incredible what can happen in those moments. So early on, design thinking, you must talk to your customers. Designing B2B solutions, for example, and talking inside your business is just an epic fail. That won't work. There's no empathy going on there. You're just going to see the world through the same lens all the time. By going out and seeing your customers, you'll get a tension immediately between what your company is trying to achieve and what a customer is willing to buy or consume from you. And that tension's probably the most exciting thing you can harness to create really creative ideas. Over time, I think you should bring your customers closer into that design process with you and literally have them riding shotgun. And I think when it's working really well, the boundary between your business and your customer is becoming very, very blurred, and certainly the interaction is very, very fluid. The most exciting experience for me is when we see teams 30 minutes with us in here designing things, and then 30 minutes later they're on the street testing, and you see this incredibly fluid exchange, and everything changes in those moments. So I've got another question.
Actually, we'd like to give it a little break because there are a lot of people who are not able to join. So
Okay.
it's all right. So maybe you can joke amongst yourselves.
Live or
Yeah, do that.
okay, so this is a spill moment where we let a few more questions spool up. Apparently I've spoken too quickly on film.
It's just that I think as well some people are
I think we have a few people now.
having trouble connecting, but we're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next
So I've got one question here. Is there anything you wouldn't use design thinking to help solve? Maybe
Yes.
Marital affairs?
We were actually discussing this before, and organisational restructures probably wouldn't use design thinking to help solve. Anything that's
I think you can understand what matters to people, but you don't want to wrap up a wolf in sheep's clothing with this, because your co-design will stop very, very rapidly when someone's better instincts kick in and they understand what's really happening here. Not cool from what we've seen. Also perhaps technical problems. When it's just a straight binary technical thing where usability isn't really key, I would be more personally inclined to go straight into an agile delivery framework and just do it and get on with it and ship it. But if it's a sort of more ambiguous challenge, you're not quite sure which way north is, maybe you're entering a new territory or a new initiative or a new strategic direction, that's when design thinking is a wonderful way to paint direction and I think highlight the right way to go by finding out what you don't really want to be doing as a business.
Or even if you just want to inject some new energy into your business, you need some new inspiration, that's when design thinking works really well. So we have another question here from Colin that's just come through. So what is the difference between human-centered design and design thinking?
Are they the same thing?
They are the same thing.
Maybe, yeah. I think most designers are human-centered, understanding what is that ultimate utility, what are people's latent problems is normally what we're looking for out there, not what people are overtly telling you, but what's going on beneath the scenes. Maybe the difference is design thinking is becoming synonymous with that sprint type process now, which is a very time box, purposeful, workshop styled activity, whereas a human-centered design is maybe a longer burn initiative looking for deep societal change or fundamentally improving the lives of someone. But both disciplines are identical in that they are completely obsessed with the end user the whole way through.
It always comes back to the people. So there's a lot of parallels between human-centered design and design thinking. And I think we have one more question coming through, so bear with us for a minute.
Who generally drives initiatives into design thinking in a project?
So the question is, who generally drives initiatives into design thinking projects?
From Roderick.
From Roderick, and man, they come from all areas, don't they?
When design thinking is working really well within a business, we start to see that people from any part of the organisation start to have the confidence to come forward with ideas or problems or challenges that they're thinking and wanting to drive them through a design thinking process. It doesn't have to come from your senior leaders, your execs. It should be coming from different parts of the organisation because different people are seeing different opportunity and different challenges out there.
Yeah, one interesting phenomenon we find is if you have a product backlog or 20 or 30 strategic initiatives on play, is the design thinking work can really shuffle the priority of those projects and things that the company might not see of immediate value to itself can change very quickly when you start getting the point of view of the customer back. And what we're tending to find is we get a big kill path in projects. So if there were 100 initiatives in play with the business, after 2 or 3 design learning cycles, it might be down to 20. And these are things that are going to make a difference to your user when they cut, dry and publish versus other initiatives that are just too sorry, again, a little bit distracted with the action behind me here. They're just never going to land in something that is of importance to the customer. So maybe, to Olivia's point, these ideas come in from everywhere, but you do need to evaluate them against some criteria or some sort of form of empathy, or however you want to do those, because you can't work on everything at once. And you're better off to achieve quick wins where you're delivering something much like Agile. Here is a result, it's something we can sell or something else the business can use. And then I think in those moments where you achieve things like that, the world suddenly looks a little bit calmer and you can go on to more adventurous topics to work on.
So I think that's all of our questions for today. So thank you so much for everyone that's joined us and for everyone that submitted all of their questions.
There were some quite tough questions there, so you're a perceptive audience. What we'd do also is please stay in touch with us, check our website. Again, we're running a twilight session which will be in late May. We'll advertise that on Facebook, and that's an opportunity to meet us and the rest of the team in person and maybe ask us these questions again if we didn't answer them for you well enough today. But for now, we'd like to thank you very much for watching us and for enjoying our prototype experience, testing, talking with our audience.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.